My name is Eleanor Breyer. I'm 62 years old. After my husband George passed away last spring, I thought the worst heartache of my life had already come and gone. But grief has a way of making you vulnerable in ways you don't see until it's too late. That's how I ended up at my son's doorstep, suitcase in hand, wearing a brave smile that was starting to crack around the edges. Nathan had insisted it was fine. "Of course you can stay with us for a while, Mom," he'd said over the phone after the funeral. His voice had sounded warm, reassuring, familiar, and I wanted to believe he meant it. Chelsea, his wife, said all the right words, too. "We're family, Eleanor. Make yourself at home." She smiled as she cleared a space in the guest room, helped me carry my bags upstairs, and even left a vase of lilies on the nightstand. But something in her smile didn't reach her eyes. I didn't want to admit it at first. I chalked it up to stress or maybe exhaustion. After all, everyone processes loss differently. The first week passed in quiet routines. I cooked dinner one night. Pot roast, Nathan's favorite from childhood. He barely touched it, saying he had a Zoom meeting. Chelsea didn't even sit down, just picked at a salad at the kitchen island and scrolled on her phone. I cleaned up in silence. By the second week, things shifted. The little things turned sharp. Chelsea started commenting on how crowded the house felt. "I can't find any space to think," she'd sigh, walking through the living room where I sat reading. Nathan, always conveniently out of earshot, didn't seem to notice. The third week, I started hearing them whispering at night. Doors would close a little too quickly when I walked down the hall. My morning coffee cup was moved out of the cabinet. My folded laundry was left on top of the dryer instead of brought up. It was as if I had become furniture, or worse, clutter. Still, I stayed quiet. I reminded myself this was temporary, that I was a guest, not a burden, that families make space, even when it's uncomfortable. But something inside me was changing. I began to feel like a ghost in a house I helped build. I had raised Nathan to be kind, to stand up for others, to protect his own. But here he was, watching the woman he married slowly erase me with polite cruelty. The breaking point came on a Sunday. We were all sitting at the kitchen table. Chelsea had made brunch, avocado toast, and something she called Zen eggs. I thanked her and tried to help set the table, but she waved me off. "No need, Eleanor. It's under control." Her tone was clipped, too sweet. I sat down anyway. Midway through the meal, she set her mimosa down and said, "I think it's time we talk about what's next." I looked up. Nathan glanced away, suddenly deeply interested in his phone. She continued, "You've been here a while now, and we've done our best to make you comfortable, but we really need our space back for our relationship, our future. You understand, right?" Her words were smooth, practiced, like this was a speech she'd rehearsed. I looked at Nathan. He didn't say a word. "Chelsea," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't realize I'd overstayed my welcome. "Nathan, is this how you feel too?" He still didn't look at me. He just shrugged. Maybe it's time, Mom. We need to build our own routines." I nodded slowly. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just stood up, wiped my hands on a napkin and said, "I'll pack my things." Chelsea smiled, relieved. "We can help you find a place," she offered. "No," I said. "You've done enough." And with that, I walked away from the table, away from my son, from the home I thought was a haven, and into something else entirely. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing for certain. I would never let myself be this powerless again. I closed the bedroom door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, letting the silence wrap around me like a second skin. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but hollow, cold. My ears were still ringing with Chelsea's words, "You're not welcome anymore." She'd said it so calmly, so casually, like she was asking someone to pass the salt. And Nathan couldn't even look at me. He sat there like a guest at someone else's confrontation, a passive observer to his own mother's dismissal. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. My hands didn't tremble as I pulled the suitcase from the closet and laid it on the bed. Instead, I moved slowly, deliberately. Every fold of every blouse, every pair of socks tucked neatly into the corners. It all became part of a ritual I couldn't explain, only obey. A ritual of erasure. I was packing up my presents, one silent item at a time. I paused over a photo frame on the nightstand. It was a picture of Nathan at 7, missing his front teeth, his arm slung around George's neck. That was a birthday picnic in the park. Nathan had insisted we bake the cake together from scratch. I had flour in my hair by the end of it. George had laughed so hard he couldn't breathe. I slid the photo into the bottom of the suitcase, beneath my scarves. It felt safer there. The room was starting to look like no one had lived in it. The bed was neatly made, the closet empty. Just a quiet shell, waiting for its next occupant. Probably Chelsea's meditation room or a home office. I took one last glance around, half expecting George to be leaning in the doorway, his brow furrowed, his voice gruff and steady. "You're not walking out like this, Elle." But of course he wasn't there. And for the first time, the weight of his absence was matched by another kind of grief. The realization that my son wasn't the boy I remembered. When I came downstairs, suitcase in hand, Chelsea was loading the dishwasher. Nathan stood by the back window, looking out as if he could will himself somewhere else. I didn't say goodbye. Not out of pettiness, but because there was nothing left to say. I walked out the front door with my head held high. The sun was shining and the air was warm. It could have been a beautiful day, if not for the ache blooming in my chest. Outside, I sat on the stone bench at the edge of their driveway, waiting for the rideshare I had just ordered on my phone. A robin chirped somewhere in a nearby tree. Life, of course, was moving on, even if I wasn't sure how. As I waited, I noticed something I hadn't before. My reflection in the car window parked next to me. I looked older than I remembered, not because of age, but because of what betrayal does to your face. It hardens it, etches lines where laughter used to live. I reached up, smoothed a hand over my cheek, and whispered to myself, "Don't break yet." The car arrived, a polite young driver asking if I was Eleanor. I nodded and got in without a word. I didn't tell him where I was coming from or why I looked like someone who had just left everything behind. I stared out the window as we pulled away. Chelsea's house, Nathan's house, disappeared in the rearview mirror. I didn't even look back. At the motel, the woman at the front desk was kind if distracted. She handed me a key card and told me breakfast ended at 10. I nodded. The room was nothing special. A beige box with a bed, a lamp, and a television I wouldn't turn on. I sat on the edge of the bed and unlaced my shoes, slowly, carefully. My hands were steady. My heartbeat was not. And still, no tears came. Instead, a kind of stillness settled over me. Not peace, not yet, but something close to control. A quiet voice in the back of my mind began to speak. You didn't argue because you knew something deeper was wrong. You didn't fight because you were listening, watching, learning. I lay down that night not as a woman defeated, but as a woman paused. And sometimes, that's where the most dangerous kind of strength begins. I didn't sleep that night. The bed was clean, the sheets stiff and freshly laundered, but nothing about the room felt real. I stared at the water-stained ceiling, listening to the hum of the mini fridge and the occasional car passing on the highway just beyond the parking lot. Grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, quiet and constant. That night, it whispered to me through memories. I thought of George. I thought of the way he used to trace circles on my wrist with his finger when I couldn't fall asleep. I thought about the way he'd watch Nathan with a kind of pride that felt endless, like his boy could do no wrong. George would have never believed Nathan could push me out like this, and maybe that's the part that broke me most, that I didn't see it coming either. A soft knock on the wall from the next room brought me back. A neighbor's TV droned faintly. A commercial, maybe. I turned on the bedside lamp. Pale light filled the room, and I saw my suitcase still zipped and upright, like it hadn't even bothered to unpack with me. I left it that way. This wasn't home. I rose slowly and walked to the little desk near the window. There, I opened my purse and pulled out the envelope George had given me before he passed. It had been sealed, with his handwriting on the front. For L, just in case. I'd carried it ever since, but I hadn't opened it, not even after the funeral. I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Not legal documents, not a will, just a note written in George's familiar scrawl. L, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I hate that. But I want you to promise me something. If anyone ever tries to make you feel small, walk away. Don't shout. Don't beg. Just walk. Then do what you've always done best. Think, plan, and fight quietly. You've always been the strong one between us. You just never believed it. But I do. I love you. Always, George. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and sharp, but they didn't fall. I sat there holding the note, letting the words settle in like rain on dry ground. George had seen something in me. Something I had forgotten was there. I folded the note carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and slid it into the drawer. For the first time since I left Nathan's house, I felt something stirring inside me. Not anger exactly. Not yet. But something deeper than hurt. Something sharper than sadness. As the days passed, I stayed in that motel room and barely left. I didn't feel like a mother. I didn't feel like a widow. I felt like a puzzle missing its border. All the edges I used to rely on had vanished. I tried calling Nathan once just to hear his voice. He didn't pick up. No voicemail either. Chelsea had likely blocked me. Or maybe he had. The rejection dug its way deeper, not because I needed their kindness, but because I realized I didn't matter to them anymore. That realization hit harder than Chelsea's words ever could. I started noticing how much quieter the world is when no one's waiting for you. No one texts. No one checks in. The quiet becomes heavy, suffocating. I went from cooking for 3 to eating crackers over the sink, from giving hugs to hearing nothing but my own breath in the dark. It wasn't just the house I lost, it was the illusion of belonging. But even in that numbness, something else began to grow. I remembered things. Moments Chelsea thought I hadn't noticed. Conversations Nathan didn't know I overheard. Little patterns that once seemed meaningless, now lit up in my mind like warning signs. The day after George's funeral, Chelsea had mentioned something about consolidating accounts. She called it financial housekeeping. I had brushed it off as her usual obsession with appearances, but now it didn't feel so harmless. I began wondering, how much more had they planned? I went back to my suitcase and pulled out the small brown folder I had grabbed in a hurry. It held bank records, property statements, and one power of attorney document George had never updated. I hadn't looked at it in months. I hadn't needed to. But suddenly, I knew this wasn't just about being unwanted. Something else had been in motion long before Chelsea asked me to leave. I wasn't just cast aside. I was being quietly erased. And I wasn't going to let that happen. It started with the brown folder. I'd packed it last minute, more out of habit than purpose. A simple manila thing I always kept in the drawer by my nightstand. I had thought it held nothing more than routine records. Bank statements, home insurance, a few notarized papers from the years George and I handled our modest estate. But now, in the cold light of that motel room, it looked like a lifeline. I laid each paper out across the bed and began sorting through them. Account numbers, balances, notes in George's handwriting. The more I read, the more unease crept in. There were figures that didn't match. A $5,000 withdrawal made just a week after George's passing, from a joint savings account I hadn't touched. A few months before, a $2,200 transfer labeled vehicle repair. We hadn't owned a car that needed repairs. Something was off. I called the bank the next morning. I spoke to a woman named Danielle, who, after verifying my identity and surviving my fumbling through security questions, hesitated before answering my real question. Who's had access to this account? Mrs. Breyer, she said carefully. There was a change in authorized users about 6 weeks ago. Nathan Breyer was added, using a notarized document we have on file. I froze. 6 weeks ago? That was just after George's funeral. I asked her to send me a scanned copy. When it arrived in my inbox that afternoon, I opened the PDF and stared at the signature. My name, my handwriting, or something close to it. I had never signed this. My pulse quickened. I hadn't expected to find a smoking gun, but there it was, in pixelated black and white. A forged document giving my son access to money that wasn't his. And Chelsea, with all her sharp smiles and controlling tendencies, had likely been the architect. Suddenly, everything made sense. Chelsea's urgency to help with finances, her suggestions to downsize, her subtle comments about my stress and forgetfulness. She wasn't just trying to nudge me out of their home. She'd been laying the groundwork to take what was mine. And Nathan, whether blinded by love or complicit in the scheme, had gone along with it. I sat still for a long time, clutching the edge of the desk as the room seemed to tilt. The betrayal was no longer just emotional. It was legal, financial, calculated. I needed help, and I knew exactly who to call. Angela Reyes had been George's lawyer for over a decade. She was sharp, respected, and had once told me over coffee that she hated bullies more than anything else. I hadn't spoken to her since the funeral, but when I called, she picked up on the second ring. "Eleanor?" she said, her voice concerned but steady. "I need to show you something," I told her. The next morning, I met Angela at her office. I walked in with my brown folder clutched to my chest like armor. Her office smelled like leather and paper, old power. As I laid out the documents and explained everything, she listened without interrupting, her jaw clenched tighter with every page. "Chelsea and Nathan forged your signature," she said. "They accessed funds you never approved, and they used a power of attorney that wasn't valid, not if George never updated it." She pushed her glasses higher on her nose. "This isn't just elder financial abuse, Eleanor. This is fraud." I nodded, the reality sinking in. "What do we do?" Angela didn't hesitate. "We start building your case." The word case felt heavy, but also like a weapon I didn't know I could wield. Over the next few days, we began collecting everything. Timestamps, witness statements, bank documents, emails. I remembered an old email Chelsea had sent months ago asking for scanned copies of George's ID and mine, under the guise of updating family records. I still had it. Angela's eyes narrowed when she read it. We also requested phone call logs from the bank. Angela subpoenaed surveillance footage from the branch where the notarization supposedly happened. If they forged my signature, they'd need more than nerve to cover it up now. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to strength again. This wasn't about revenge. This was about standing up even when the ones who were supposed to love you most had quietly dismantled everything behind your back. It was no longer a question of whether they meant to betray me. They had. And now I had the proof. There's a moment in every woman's life when she stops asking, "Why did they do this to me?" and starts asking, "What am I going to do about it?" That moment came for me on a rainy Thursday morning, sitting across from Angela in her office. I was holding a mug of coffee I hadn't touched. The documents we'd gathered were stacked neatly between us like a silent witness. Bank statements, a forged signature, time-stamped emails, and the questionable power of attorney. All of it pointed to something far more deliberate than I'd initially believed. Angela leaned forward. "You have enough here to move forward. We can file charges for financial fraud, request a court investigation into the account activity, and formally revoke any access they've taken. But Eleanor, are you ready for what this might look like?" I stared out the window at the gray skyline. Was I ready? What I wanted to say was no. No, I wasn't ready to go to war with my son. I wasn't ready to air private family wounds in a courtroom. I wasn't ready to become the kind of woman who needed legal documents to protect her dignity. But the truth was, I didn't have the luxury of ready. They had crossed a line, and if I didn't push back now, they'd cross it again. Next time, I might not even see it coming. I looked Angela square in the eyes. Do it. That same day, Angela began drafting a formal complaint. We filed a request for a temporary freeze on all joint financial accounts, submitted evidence to the Elder Fraud Task Force in the county, and scheduled a preliminary civil hearing. She explained that elder financial exploitation wasn't just morally disgusting. In our state, it carried serious legal consequences. I didn't tell Nathan, I didn't call Chelsea, I didn't send one of those emotional texts mothers write late at night, hoping for a sliver of remorse. I had done that enough in my life. This wasn't about fixing things anymore. This was about reclaiming control. Meanwhile, Angela suggested I visit a trauma-informed therapist, someone who could help me process what was happening. I was hesitant at first, but I agreed. Her name was Dr. Laney, and she met me with the gentlest gaze I'd seen in weeks. In our first session, I admitted something that had been echoing inside me since the day I left Nathan's house. I keep wondering if I did something wrong, if maybe I made it easy for them to take advantage of me. She paused, then said something I'll never forget. Eleanor, trust misplaced is not a weakness. It's a sign you were raised to believe in people. The weakness is in the ones who chose to abuse that trust. I left her office feeling like someone had lifted 100 pounds off my shoulders. Over the following days, I began taking small steps to rebuild my life. Not the one I had with George, or the version I had imagined post-retirement with family close by, but a new version, one where I no longer waited for someone else's approval to feel at home. I found a modest one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, next to a public library and a little diner with the best blueberry muffins I'd ever tasted. The landlord, a retired firefighter named Al, gave me a discount when I told him I used to be a school principal. "Oh, teachers saved my daughter's life," he said with a smile. The apartment had a sunlit corner just big enough for a reading chair and a potted plant. I bought both. It was the first thing I'd chosen just for myself in years. Back at Angela's office, we continued preparing. She brought in a forensic handwriting expert to confirm the signature on the bank document wasn't mine. The results were undeniable. She also had a paralegal track down the notary who'd supposedly stamped the forged signature. Turned out that notary had never worked with our family. The evidence was stacking up. And still, I kept quiet. Chelsea posted vacation pictures with Nathan on social media, as if nothing had happened. She smiled in every photo, sipping cocktails and posing with friends. I didn't like any of the pictures, but I saved them. I wanted to remember the smug certainty she carried, the kind people wear before the ground gives out beneath them. The truth is, I didn't want revenge. I wanted acknowledgement, accountability. I wanted them to look me in the eye and see the woman they underestimated, not just as a mother, but as a woman with power, patience, and now, proof. The turning point wasn't loud. It didn't come with a dramatic confrontation or some cinematic showdown. It came quietly in a lawyer's office with a pen and a signature. The same way they tried to steal from me. I began taking it all back. I never told them I knew. That was the most important decision I made. While Angela worked behind the scenes and the legal filings moved forward, I let Chelsea and Nathan believe I had simply faded into the background like a woman too broken to fight. That illusion gave me space and time. I made sure every move I made was invisible. I bought a prepaid phone. I used it only to communicate with Angela and the investigator she hired to pull credit reports and trace suspicious transfers. I canceled my old number, the one Chelsea had access to from our family plan. She texted me once. "Hope you're doing okay. Let us know if you need anything." I didn't reply. That was the last message she ever sent me. Nathan didn't reach out at all. They had written me off. That was their first mistake. At the same time, I began building a paper trail of everything. I requested printed statements from every bank account I had shared with George. I made copies of my last known will just to verify what had changed. I even requested a transcript of a casual call I'd had with the family bank months ago, in which I'd asked about our balances, a call Chelsea had intercepted and insisted on helping with while I was still grieving. I started documenting more than just numbers. I wrote down memories, fragments, things Chelsea had said over dinner, the time she asked to see George's social security information, the way Nathan got quiet anytime I mentioned our joint savings. I detailed it all in a spiral notebook I kept hidden beneath the seat cushion of my reading chair, not because I expected anyone to read it, but because writing it gave me back control. For the first time in a long time, I was the narrator again, and while I moved silently, I also began reshaping my world. I went to the DMV and updated every legal record with my new address. I had my name taken off every document they might try to use against me. I contacted the financial advisor, George, and I used before his death. A quiet man named Harold, who remembered me immediately when I called. "George always said you were the one with the real sense," Harold said over the phone. "I'll help however I can." He reviewed every account for vulnerabilities, transferred the remainder of our shared investments into a protected trust in my name, and filed a fraud alert with the IRS. Chelsea had no idea how thorough this was about to get, and still, I kept playing along. I sent Nathan a birthday card 2 weeks later. Not a long letter, not a note filled with guilt or longing, just a plain card with the message, "Thinking of you. Love. Mom." No return address, just my name. I pictured them reading it. I imagined Chelsea frowning, trying to decode what it meant. I imagined Nathan pretending he didn't care, when deep down something in him probably did. Or maybe not. But that part no longer controlled me. The beauty of the calm resistance is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't threaten or shout. It just works. Slowly, methodically, and right under the nose of those who assume silence equals surrender. And while I waited for our court date, I allowed myself moments of healing, small ones. I joined a community center book club. No one there knew who I was or what had happened to me. I was just Eleanor, the quiet woman who loved historical fiction and had strong opinions about Austen. It was liberating. I began walking every morning in the park near my apartment. The same path, the same bench near the duck pond. At first, I walked to clear my head, but over time, it became something else. A quiet reclaiming of space. My space. No longer someone's house guest or someone's afterthought. I began baking again, not for a family that didn't appreciate it, but for myself. I made George's favorite peach cobbler one rainy afternoon, and for the first time since his funeral, I sat in my kitchen and ate it without crying. I even smiled, but most importantly, I stayed steady. That's what resistance really is. Not anger, not noise, not destruction. It's steadiness. It's watching the people who try to take everything from you walk right into the consequences of their own arrogance, while you sip your tea and prepare your next move. By the end of that month, I had everything in place: legal documentation, asset protection, witness testimonies, forensic confirmation, and one final document: a cease and desist letter Angela had drafted, ready to deliver when the time was right. The calm was ending, and the storm, this time, was mine to send. It arrived on a Tuesday. A thick white envelope hand-delivered by a private process server, addressed to Mr. Nathan Breyer and Mrs. Chelsea Breyer. The letterhead was clean, understated, and unmistakably serious. Reyes and Associates, attorneys at law. Inside was a cease and desist letter outlining a formal accusation of financial misconduct, including detailed evidence of forged documents, unauthorized access to joint accounts, and a demand for immediate restitution. It also included notice of pending civil litigation and a request for mediation to avoid full prosecution. The trap wasn't just set, it had been sprung. Angela had timed it perfectly. We waited until every piece of the case was airtight. The bank had confirmed the signature wasn't mine. The notary in question had given a written statement. She never notarized the document they submitted. And the forensic handwriting analysis was conclusive. The signature on the power of attorney had been forged. Badly. Sloppily, even. But it wasn't just the paper trail that made the trap lethal. It was their complete ignorance of it. They had no idea I'd been working quietly in the background, brick by brick, to build something that now stood taller than either of them could reach. I wasn't there when the envelope landed on their doorstep, but Angela's investigator was. He reported that Chelsea came to the door first, confident, dismissive, probably assuming it was some routine delivery, until she saw the man's badge. She didn't smile then. Nathan showed up at her side a few moments later, pale, confused, then furious. They argued in the doorway, flipping through the pages, their expressions shifting from smug irritation to raw panic. Later that day, my phone buzzed. The prepaid one I kept hidden in a kitchen drawer. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Chelsea's voice came through, brittle and tight. "Eleanor, hi, we received something today. A letter. I think maybe there's been a misunderstanding. Call us when you get this." 5 minutes later, another message. This time from Nathan. "Mom, please. What's going on? Why would you do this? Can we just talk?" I didn't call back. Instead, I sat in the sunlit corner of my apartment with a fresh cup of tea, watching the steam curl upward like the breath of something waking up inside me. I had spent weeks being silent, being forgotten, being underestimated. That time was over. The next morning, Angela received an email from Chelsea's lawyer. A panicked attempt to stall. They requested a private conversation to clarify intent. Angela declined firmly. We weren't negotiating behind closed doors. Everything would go through formal mediation or court. By Thursday, I received a handwritten note in the mail. No envelope, no return address. Just folded paper, stuck between the security gate of my building and the mailbox. The handwriting was Nathan's. "Mom, please don't do this. I didn't know everything Chelsea was doing. She told me you were overwhelmed, that you needed help with the accounts. I thought she was helping. I should have asked more questions. I should have protected you. I'm sorry. Can we please talk?" I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in my kitchen drawer. The same one that held the burner phone and the notes I'd written documenting every betrayal. It didn't deserve a frame. It didn't deserve a reply. Because this was never just about apology. It was about accountability. Nathan hadn't protected me. He had watched me pack my bags in silence while his wife pushed me out like an unwanted guest. He had ignored the long pauses, the stiff smiles, the 1,000 invisible wounds I had suffered under their roof, and now he wanted to talk because they were cornered. Number. They had walked this road on their own. I had simply laid out the map. Angela filed the final court documents that Friday. A court date was scheduled. Financial penalties were already being discussed. If they didn't cooperate, criminal charges could follow. Meanwhile, I continued my routine like nothing had changed. I went to book club. I watered my little window plant. I smiled at Al, my landlord, when we crossed paths in the hallway. But I was watching. Chelsea posted nothing on social media that week. No beach selfies, no wine tastings, no smug brunch photos. Silence, the loudest admission of all. They had taken what they thought was a quiet, aging woman and tried to bury her beneath paperwork and power plays. But I didn't disappear. I waited. I built. I watched. And now the letter had done what it was meant to do. They weren't just caught. They were unraveling. It took place in a small, beige-walled conference room at the courthouse annex. No flashing lights, no dramatic shouting. Just 4 chairs, a long wooden table, and a silence that felt like it had been waiting years to be broken. Angela sat beside me, calm and unreadable, in her charcoal gray suit. Her presence was like armor, not loud, not aggressive, just quietly immovable. Across from us sat Nathan and Chelsea, flanked by their attorney, a young man who looked like he regretted taking this case the moment he walked in. Nathan wouldn't look at me. Chelsea tried to, once. But when our eyes met, she flinched. Gone was the smirk, the casual condescension, the suburban queen bee, who once spoke to me like I was a misplaced throw pillow in her curated world. She looked tired, edges frayed, like a woman used to controlling the script and now unsure what page we were on. The mediator, a woman named Dana, opened the session with professionalism and a hint of steel in her voice. We're here today to address Mrs. Eleanor Breyer's claims of financial misconduct, document forgery, and elder exploitation against Mr. and Mrs. Nathan and Chelsea Breyer. All parties have received and reviewed the submitted evidence. Before we proceed to recommendations, both sides will have the opportunity to speak. Angela spoke first. She presented the case clearly, without venom. Just facts. The forged signature verified by a handwriting expert. The notary's affidavit confirming no record of the authorization. The unauthorized withdrawals. The email Chelsea had sent requesting George's sensitive information. Angela even included a timeline showing how the financial access coincided exactly with the period when I was at my most vulnerable. Immediately after George's death. Nathan shifted in his seat. His hands were clasped together, knuckles white. Chelsea stared at the table. When it was their turn, their lawyer tried to offer a softened version of events. There was confusion during a time of family grief, misunderstandings, no malicious intent. Our clients assumed mutual access was standard. Angela cut in, politely but firmly. Forging a signature and misusing a power of attorney is not a misunderstanding. The lawyer glanced at Chelsea, who gave him the tiniest nod. It was clear they had rehearsed a line. And now, it was time to deliver it. Chelsea sat up straighter. "Eleanor, I never meant to hurt you," she began, voice shaky but calculated. "I thought I was helping. After George passed, you seemed overwhelmed. You were forgetful, and I was just trying to keep things from falling apart. Maybe I made mistakes, but I never meant to push you out." I didn't respond. I just watched her speak, like she was acting in a play she didn't rehearse well enough for. Then Nathan spoke. And this is what stayed with me. "Mom," he said quietly, finally meeting my eyes. "I'm sorry. I should have done more. I should have seen what was happening. I let Chelsea handle too much. I thought it was easier that way. I didn't think you'd actually leave. And when you did, I didn't know how to fix it." He looked older than I remembered, like regret had aged him in fast forward. But the truth was, his apology came far too late. Dana asked if I had anything to say before the mediation concluded. I nodded. I sat forward and spoke, not loudly but with purpose. "You watched me pack my life into a suitcase, Nathan. You watched your wife talk to me like I was a stranger in my own family, and you didn't say a word. You let her erase me. And now that you're caught, you're sorry." Neither of them moved. "This wasn't a mistake," I continued. "It was a choice, one you made over and over while smiling in my face, and now you'll live with the consequences, just like I lived with the silence." There was no yelling. No tears, just a long, aching quiet that settled over the room like fog. Dana closed the session. Angela packed the documents without a word. Chelsea's attorney requested a copy of the final agreement. Nathan whispered something to Chelsea as they left, but I didn't care to hear it. As I stepped outside, the sun hit my face. Warm, solid, freeing. Angela turned to me as we reached her car. "You handled that with grace," she said. "No," I replied, almost smiling. "I handled it with truth." The battle was over. I had already won. There were no headlines, no dramatic phone calls, no public apologies, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The settlement was finalized within 3 weeks of the mediation. Chelsea and Nathan were ordered to pay restitution. every dollar they'd withdrawn plus damages. They also had to pay legal fees. But more importantly, the judge granted my request to remove their access from all remaining accounts tied to George's estate. I reclaimed everything, my savings, my identity, and my autonomy. Not with a fight, but with quiet, calculated strength. After it was done, I didn't celebrate. I didn't buy something flashy. I didn't even tell anyone in my book club. Instead, I bought myself a rose bush. Just one. A pale pink hybrid tea, rose called Peace. I planted it in a ceramic pot on my small apartment balcony and sat beside it with a cup of lemon tea. I watched the wind move gently through its petals. That was my victory, not in courtrooms or legal paperwork, but in peace earned, not given. I'd spent most of my life tying my identity to others, to George, to my role as Nathan's mother, to being the ever-supportive wife, the helpful in-law, the dependable matriarch. And when they tried to erase me, I feared there would be nothing left underneath all those roles. But I was wrong. In the silence they left behind, I discovered a new version of myself. Not a woman in waiting, not a woman abandoned, a woman who had finally stepped into her own life. I didn't hear from Nathan again. Not after the mediation, not after the judge's decision, not after the final check arrived. There was no thank you, no second apology. Chelsea unfollowed me on everything, as if that would undo what she'd done. But I didn't feel bitterness. I felt clarity. They had shown me who they were, and I believed them now. I donated part of the settlement money to a local nonprofit that supports women over 50 facing housing instability. I asked for no recognition, no acknowledgement. I just wanted to make sure someone like me, someone whose family had turned them into a burden, had a place to go that didn't feel like exile. That gave me more peace than any court ruling ever could. My days returned to a new kind of rhythm. Morning walks in the park, coffee at my corner cafe, book club on Thursdays, where I gently argued about whether Pride and Prejudice or Persuasion was the superior Austen novel. I grew close to a neighbor, Meredith, a widowed retired nurse who lived one floor down. She brought me fresh scones, and I taught her how to make peach cobbler. We laughed together, watched reruns of old detective shows, and traded stories of lives that didn't go the way we once imagined, but still turned out to be ours. One morning, she asked, "Do you miss them?" I thought about that. "I miss who I thought they were," I said, "but not who they became." I meant it. That summer, I took a small trip, just me, a bed and breakfast in the mountains, no itinerary, no expectations. I brought my favorite books, my walking shoes, and a journal I had bought after the settlement was finalized. On the first page, I wrote, "They told me I was no longer welcome, so I made my own welcome mat." It felt like truth. When I came back, my rose bush had bloomed again, one perfect new blossom, soft pink and open wide to the sun. I sat beside it, tea in hand, and smiled, not because I'd beaten them, but because I hadn't become them. That's the difference. They tried to take everything, my home, my voice, my worth. And instead of yelling back, I quietly took it all back piece by piece, until there was nothing left they could touch. That's what real victory looks like. Not loud, not bitter, just free. It was a Sunday morning just after sunrise. The air was still and the world hadn't quite woken up yet. I made myself a cup of coffee, the strong kind George used to make, and stepped out onto the balcony. The rose bush was blooming again. 3 full blossoms, pale pink with golden centers, bowed gently in the breeze. I knelt beside them and ran my fingers along the edge of one velvety petal. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about courtrooms or betrayal or the words Chelsea had thrown at me like they cost nothing. I was thinking about growth, about stillness, about what happens when you survive something that should have broken you and realize you didn't just survive it, you changed because of it. I didn't need to retell the story to everyone around me. The people who mattered didn't ask, and the people who would have gossiped didn't deserve to know. This was mine. quiet, whole. Sometimes I thought about the things I used to give away too freely: my time, my patience, my trust, and how those things weren't weaknesses but offerings. And when people abuse those offerings, the answer isn't to become bitter. The answer is to stop offering yourself to the wrong people. There's strength in walking away without looking back. There's even more strength in not needing to explain why. Later that afternoon, I visited George's grave for the first time since everything ended. I had avoided it until now. Maybe I had needed to close the chapter in my own life before I could speak to him again. I brought fresh lilies, his favorite, and sat beside the headstone, the same way I used to sit beside him on the porch in the evenings when the sun dipped low. "I did what you told me to," I said out loud. "I walked, I kept my head up, and I fought back without losing myself." The cemetery was quiet. A bird chirped in a nearby tree. I smiled through a lump in my throat. "I miss you," I whispered, "but I think you'd be proud." There were no signs or symbols, no voice from beyond, just the deep, rooted sense that I had done what needed to be done. Not for revenge, not even for justice, but for me. I stayed a while longer, letting the wind play with the edges of my cardigan until the sun began to shift. Then I stood, smoothed the grass around the headstone, and walked away. That evening, as the light faded from the sky, I opened my journal again, the same one I had taken on my mountain trip. Only a few pages remained. I had filled it slowly, carefully, with truths I hadn't been able to say out loud. On the last page, I wrote, "Some doors close loudly. Others close like a breath you didn't realize you were holding. Mine closed with the quiet weight of a lawyer's letter, the silence of unanswered apologies, and the gentle sound of a rose blooming on my balcony. I didn't scream, I didn't beg. I remembered who I was, and that was enough." When I finished writing, I closed the journal and set it on the shelf beside a framed picture of George and me, taken on our last anniversary, before everything changed. We were smiling, no tension. Just two people who had built a life together, a life that deserved to be honored even in its final act. The phone never rang again. No surprise visits. No more letters slid through gates or folded apologies taped to doors. And I was okay with that. The peace I had created wasn't something they could take back, because it wasn't built on their acceptance. It was built on my boundaries. And boundaries, I had learned, are a woman's final word. Not shouted, not scrawled in rage, but lived. So I went to bed that night with the window open and the scent of roses drifting in. The world outside kept moving as it always does. But in my little home, I was still. I was quiet. I was free. And finally, completely, I was mine.